Representative Luna, God bless you, woman. Thank you for taking time. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
So we come full circle. I was here with a bunch of Idaho folk talking about water and nuclear power, and I very fortunately get to pop in and chat with you. You are somebody who is obviously going after some of the harder issues within our government, specifically things that are not popular, things that have kind of become institutionalized, things that people have considered conspiracy, or, you know, there are all kinds of slants. Insider trading, Epstein files, JFK, where would you like to start?
I'd have to say probably insider trading, because today, as you're here, it's kind of serendipitous in timing. But right before we went to the 50-day shutdown, which that's a separate conversation. But I was sitting on the steps of the Capitol with Tim Burchett, and we had seen, you know, these websites, Unusual Whales, Quantum, all of them. We're tracking some of the trades of members of Congress, and it's not just a Democrat thing; it's happening on the Republican side too. And, you know, when you look into these stats where you have, you know, Pelosi over the term that she was in office, I think plus 40 years, she got a 17,000% return on her investments.
Yeah, but she's gangster at math, bro.
I guess she must be like the most savant stock trader in U.S. history. And then you have, on average, the Democrat and Republicans both getting 600% returns on their investments, and then they short the stock. That in itself, even if it's just, you know, 20%, first of all, most Americans go to jail for that. Martha Stewart definitely did. But yet somehow it's considered acceptable. And yet we have the ability to change it, and we have chosen not to. Yet people will run on re-election saying that they're going to fight corruption. And they get really, I think, tribal in the party, not wanting to even call out the corruption within their own party. And I've been pretty transparent and straightforward on, if there's a corrupt Democrat, I'm going to call it out. And if there's a corrupt Republican, I'm going to call it out. Because I think that it makes our party look bad if we're covering up that corruption as well. So ultimately...
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, one of the problems that it's my understanding you run into when you pass or attempt to engage in this type of legislation is the caveat is that most of the people engaged in Congress and as representatives or senators, they have, you know, like separate people that manage their money. They're like, no, I don't, like Nancy Pelosi is probably not like, oh yeah, I'm at home watching the stocks.
Well,
she's going to say, what's that?
Her husband is the one that was making these great trades, et cetera.
Got you. So you have people, even if they're not that individual person, you have people close enough that information can transfer over. Mm-hmm. How do you address legislation with that?
So there's a bunch of consensus bills, right? But the number one bill that we have right now is the Restoring Trust in Congress Act that Chip Roy put forward. And that one specifically makes it illegal or not allowed for members of Congress, their spouses, and their dependent children to be able to engage in the individual stock trades. And what we're finding is the people that are doing the best in the stock market, i.e. insider information. By the way, any member of Congress that tells you that it's not happening is literally lying to you. It is absolutely happening. They all of a sudden have spouses that are becoming great stock traders. Their dependent children are becoming great stock traders. And so we are trying to do everything that we can to make it as difficult as possible to include a waiting period from the time that you have to announce your sales, et cetera, or to be able to basically make it to where if you are on a committee of jurisdiction and you, let's say, hear that there's going to be a massive weapons sale, or that you are going to be passing something that will benefit a specific weapons company in the National Defense Authorization Act, that you actually can't benefit from that information. And so what's interesting about this is you would think that this would be a very open discussion, right? So as soon as Burchett and I were on the steps of the Capitol and we said, we're just going to bring forward something called a discharge petition, which is where you go manually collect signatures from the House to try to force the vote on the topic. We got pushback. We got pushback from our own party. We had people that were texting us saying that we were going to be responsible for losing the midterms because we were forcing our colleagues to take bad votes, that we are somehow jeopardizing the republic. And then I was actually joking, but very seriously said, I was like, you know, last time I checked, our founding fathers didn't have stock portfolios. And also, too, if you're voting to benefit your literal financial interests, how are you ever expected to truly represent your constituents? Because let's say you have massive amount of stocks in a pharmaceutical company.
Sure.
How is that going to lower the prescription prices when you are actually yourself benefiting directly from it? And so when we did decide to kind of push this to the forefront, then all of a sudden you saw people say, wait, hold up, like you just can't do this. And so it got us to a position where they noticed a hearing, meaning they wanted to hear from experts on the topic. Well, who's going to actually go into a hearing and say, no, there's no such thing as insider trading and Congress should be able to engage in individual stock trades and it's not corrupt?
Not a popular position.
Right? Not a popular position, political suicide, no matter what position you're in, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent. So for us specifically, we're like, okay, perfect. Like we'll all be able to go into the committee and like ask questions with the witnesses and potentially highlight some of our colleagues that are engaging in insider trading. Well, then the chairman of the committee closed the hearing so that we can't actually go in and engage in the discussion. And then I'm like, okay, so if we're talking about, you know, and all you have in DC is your word and your vote, right? And so that like the trust is the currency. And clearly this place, we have trust issues because you find out there are a lot of people are pretty much either narcissistic, sociopaths, power hungry, and they definitely don't ever want to leave here. So that's probably a separate conversation for term limits. But we're talking about, you know, okay, well, what amendments would you want to see into this so that we can make it more palatable for the entire conference to vote on? But also at the same time, you don't want to water down the bill so much to where the insider trading is still happening. And they're like, well, we don't want there to be an open and public amendment process, meaning that they don't want people to be able to see who's offering the amendments. So they want to make it closed door, and they don't even want to mark up the bill that has over 110 members of Congress that have signed on to it. They want something else. Well, why would you want something else? Well, because the bill that we have is pretty straightforward. It's pretty strict, and it was both agreed on by Democrats and Republicans. So you have this internal fight where on these issues specifically, I think banning insider trading and probably the UAP topic are the top two most bipartisan issues in Congress, right? And so we're leading out the charge on both. But specifically to this, you have massive support from the American people. Over 80% of Americans support this, like easy without a doubt. Doesn't matter party affiliation, they know it's corrupt. But within the institution, you have massive amounts of opposition. So this morning, right before you came in, they did not want there to be other members participating in this actual conversation in this committee for the markup, or they told us that they do not want to mark up this bill. So they're trying to silo the narrative, but it doesn't work, especially on social media, because you have so many people. I mean, we have people from all factions of Congress, right? You have Tim Burchett, Chip Roy, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jayapal, like people that you would not typically expect to work together on a certain issue, or like, no, this is absolutely corrupt, it needs to stop. So I think that we're going to get to a point where we're going to have to do the discharge petition because, in my opinion, they're not being honest brokers right now with even how they've handled this whole process. They're trying to control the narrative because they understand that if you have the public support and you have constituents in people's districts that are saying, why the hell are you trying to stop the banning of insider trading? Well, how do you look your constituents in the face and get reelected saying that you're true to the American people when you're engaging this stock trading behind closed doors?
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
And again, thank you for all of that. You mentioned that some of the pushback and articulate, because like, what's the argument against this? And you said that there are people saying, hey, look, you're going to force us to take a bad vote ahead of midterms and it's going to be bad. What is the bad vote? Is the bad vote that no, we won't support this?
Yes.
Or that yes, we'll support it, and then our like power brokers are going to be mad at us and then we'll lose?
Yeah.
Like, what is it?
The bad vote is that they won't support it because they have massive stock portfolios.
Okay, but when they say you're going to force us to take a bad vote, you're not getting, like, if you're not doing insider trading, then your stock portfolio will continue on in whatever trajectory it was in. So like, you're not being forced to make a bad vote. You're literally just being asked,
forced
like,
to follow
what the
the
hell
law
are you doing?
or follow the law. What's also interesting is that we were told that members of Congress use this to pay for their kids' college education because we don't make them
what? When they say use this, what's this?
stock trading.
Okay, that's fine. We all use stock trading theoretically. You're not that
trading
special.
is not
That's different,
fine.
right?
Yeah. And I think that that's a big difference, but it's gotten so bad, right? Like you can look at the numbers and it's happening on both sides and people are so afraid to call it out. But I've gotten to the point where my first time in office, I genuinely came in somewhat naive to how the institution functioned. Now that I've seen it, I've read through the rule manual, I know how the game works and I see the characters and I see what they're doing. And the fact is people are like, well, why haven't certain issues been resolved? Like maybe prescription prices. What about healthcare? Well, holy cow, have you seen the lobby that goes into healthcare and prescription alone? It's insane. And so I don't take any prescription special interest money for that reason, but I'm one of maybe 3 Republicans that doesn't. So it's been an issue on both sides and it will continue unless you actually reform the institution from within. And part of that reforming of the institution, which in my opinion is getting back to the basics of what the founding fathers wanted, was not having massive stock portfolios where you're getting information prior to the markets being impacted, personally benefiting, therefore betting against the American people because you understand what's happening with the markets and you're going to tip the scale. And these people do have jurisdiction over the markets that they're affecting. For example, people that have jurisdiction over healthcare, people that have jurisdiction over different defense contractors. I mean, it goes to every aspect of society. So in my opinion, we shouldn't be allowed to do it. I think that we have more than enough evidence to prove that it's happening. I think the statistics for members of Congress that are engaging in these stock trades, they're outperforming the S&P to such incredible odds that it's actually not statistically possible unless you were engaged in insider trading.
If any of these people were private citizens, what would the result be?
Yeah, they'd go to jail. These people
For like a long time?
For a long time. Remember what happened with Martha Stewart?
Yeah, but she went to like her, 500-acre ranch somewhere.
Most people would probably get hit with some form of corruption and they'd go to jail for it. But that's, again, the thing is that you have this aspect. And the other thing is, like, part of my task force, I've been looking into this stuff historically on what happened with Kennedy. And you realize that this government has become so big and bloated that you have people that are here that are bureaucrats, and they're not necessarily loyal to even the people. It's mainly their friends and their party. So you do have partisan targeting of people, and we can look at what happened with last Congress. So I was on House Oversight when we were looking into the Hunter Biden laptop and the pay-for-play scheme that the president at the time, so Biden, had engaged in with his son. We had something called a SARS report from the Treasury that actually had all the bank transactions, and we could see exactly who was paying who, how much money they were getting. I mean, there was a Biden, I think it was a grandchild, so someone that's a minor that was getting massive amounts of cash from the Chinese government. So it's like, why at the time would you have this? It's supposed to be okay, and then you have Democrat IRS whistleblowers that come forward and say, hey, Hunter Biden hasn't paid his taxes. They open up an investigation into him. And these are Democrats. Open up an investigation, and the White House shuts down the investigation, and these two guys get fired. And they ended up testifying to us. So it's a problem. You have to have the accountability factor. And what I always tell people is, if we don't police ourselves, if we don't have the ability to enforce that, then how could we expect to be the moral backbone of this country? And it's an incredibly important job. But I think that people for a long time have lost sight of what this job is. Ultimately, it's still public service, but they look at it more as a kind of like a political elitist class that thinks that they are outside, or the untouchables, versus the American people. And there is a big perspective and persona of people that look down on your average Americans, thinking that they're too stupid to understand what's happening. And so even just the other day, there was a censure of Stacey Plaskett, that she was texting Jeffrey Epstein after he was already convicted during the impeachment trials for Trump. And instead of figuring out like, hey, I'm going to talk to you and figure out if I can get justice for these victims, or I'm going to see, if I can get any information that will benefit the investigations that I, as a member of Congress, can launch into you.
Sure.
Doesn't do that, but is looking for smears on the president. So she's offered to be censured. And it was our own party. It was the Republican Party that took a deal to not censure her in an effort to protect a member of Congress that is right now entangled in controversy and probably shouldn't be seeking re-election because he's a Republican. And so I will call that out myself. I don't have any problem disciplining that person if we're allowed to, by bringing the vote to the floor, but they didn't want to let that happen. So it's happening on both sides. That's just a small example of the many things that happen up here on a regular basis. And that is why people need to pay attention to what's happening with their elected members of Congress. How did your member of Congress vote? You should be looking at that stuff, but I get it. People are busy. So,
yeah. If I may, okay, I had the director of the Idaho Hospital Association on recently talking about problems with healthcare. And then I also had the medical director of St. Luke's hospital system, which is the largest hospital system in the state of Idaho.
Yeah.
He came on because there's a huge problem with people lacking faith in the medical establishment. And I want to talk to him about it. It's like, okay, how do we get people better aligned, right? Like, how do we get people engaging in medical care? How do we resolve conflicts and issues with healthcare? Because this is the best we have right now, right?
Yeah.
One of the problems that really became clear in that conversation, it's like, all right, look, you and I are patients, okay, and we're sitting here in the chairs, and we're up against insurance companies pharmaceutical companies, hospital associations, medical providers that are standard, like DOs or MDs or whatever, and then an entire separate, unregulated system of healthcare people over here that like don't take insurance and do other things. Whatever their efficacy is irrelevant to me. But we have all of these institutions that are like, it's like the Fugitive with Harrison Ford. Like, Tommy Lee Jones eventually realizes like this pharmaceutical company is like a monster. It's like $3 billion, whatever. That's what we're up against, you and I, as just average citizens attempting to navigate the system that is clearly designed to treat us like the Matrix battery of money. Like it's like you're in Mario Brothers just getting coins out of people. It's like ding, ding, ding. And that was really upsetting to me to kind of get to the end of that interview and realize not that any of these two individuals had said anything bad. It's like they just kind of confirmed, oh yeah, like you and I as individuals are dead in the water. We have no capacity to fight or address or even orient ourselves properly against these monster systems. And as you're talking about this, it's like, great, we can go after insider trading. Okay, that's one. Like, are we gonna do anything about drugs? No, there's a pharmaceutical lobby or like prescription drug lobby, so you're gonna keep paying, 10x what Canada pays or something like that. Like, how, if you're looking at me as just an average US citizen who's not the most well-heeled, I don't have millions of dollars, I don't have, power in any particular way. How am I supposed to navigate my life recognizing that this is the government that's, essentially in control of all of these things in my life?
Yeah, so this has been probably the number one issue that Trump has been trying to beat the drum on with Congress specifically, because I think he even knows how bad it is with the lobbying efforts. And he himself is massive on like the capping prescription prices, etc. But will Congress codify that? And the answer is probably no. But what we can do, and actually do have something, before we went on this break, I was so sick of the stuff that I realized was happening up here that I filed no less than, I think, 12 discharge petitions to actually force a vote on. These are massively bipartisan things. The one is the capping prescription pill prices and codifying an executive order that Trump did, which, by the way, the executive orders, typically people are like, oh, we don't like the executive orders because really it skips and bypasses Congress. But Congress has become so systemically corrupt that if you do want to actually make the changes there on these issues like healthcare or prescription prices, et cetera, it has to be done at that level, or else it's not going to happen. And so I've been very open in dialogue with the White House, and they've also, too, though, have their own efforts to tell the Speaker and the floor team and really the Republican Party their goals and objectives for what they want to codify into law. But all that to say, as we lead up into Christmas, at least one day a week while I'm here, I'm going to be doing discharge petitions. And I'm at least going to do what I can do. I might be one member, but I know that there's other members of Congress that agree with me. So, for example, on PBMs, or for example, on the capping prescription prices. All of these things do matter. If you're looking at, though, how do you navigate it? Well, you have to understand that, A, getting involved in the political dialogue does matter. It's sad to say, but in the United States, a majority of Americans don't track politics the way that they do in other countries. And a lot of Americans don't vote. And that's the problem, is like you have to engage in the process. But you also have to understand that where you get your news from is incredibly important. And I would always say to look at both sides so that you can accurately form your opinion. Because like, even though I don't agree with them, I'll still watch other outlets to figure out what the argument is, to make sure that I'm not missing anything in their perspective, or that I'm not missing anything addressing and how I'm responding to it if I don't agree with it. But as a whole, what has been interesting to see is that if you were to have a reform of the way that people get elected, so campaign finance reform, I'd have to say, if I had a magic wand, campaign finance reform, term limits, and then the banning insider trading, and you would reform this institution to where people probably that are corrupt wouldn't seek re-election because they can't personally benefit from it. But then also, too, you don't have people that are doing this for 30, 40 years, which there are some members that have done that for that long, who have done literally nothing. They just come up here and they vote how they're told without actually advocating or trying to change the system. But then you have this aspect of healthcare. So like going back into what you were saying, we also have an issue with our food supply. And so I was on the MAHA train before MAHA even really kicked off with Bobby Kennedy. And when I first got in, it actually really started where I was interviewing someone at the FDA. And I was giving them the benefit of the doubt, but I had uncovered this. I don't know if you remember, a couple years ago, they had pulled all the baby formula off of the shelves.
I do recall.
And there was an outbreak with contaminated formula. Well, I was asking them about this, and after the hearing, I was shocked because ultimately what we found out is that there's only, I think, one manufacturer for baby formula in the country. And this manufacturer will sell, and then everyone else just repackages and relabels, and then it hits the markets. Well, these corporations aren't required to self-report if there is contamination. So during COVID, they weren't inspecting the facilities. The FDA wasn't, so they weren't keeping the companies on their toes. Well, there had been an outbreak in this certain type of bacteria, and the number was over 20% of infants exposed to this bacteria died. Well, during COVID, there was a lot of reports that people were dying, children were getting sick. I don't know if they were using COVID as a means of rolling these contaminated formula into the COVID numbers. That's probably a completely separate conversation. But instead of the company reporting when they should have reported, which was before the end of their quarter, so anyone in corporation is going to say, no company's going to do that because it's going to affect their sales, right? Or if there's an outbreak, they don't want that to impact their market. They waited, and then when they did report, by the time that the formula was recalled, damage was already done. And then after the fact, instead of throwing the formula away, which should have happened, the Biden administration sent the formula to the migrant child facilities. So
wait, can you repeat that?
yeah, so they sent the formula, the tainted formula, whether it was by mistake, maybe they thought, well, it can't be that bad, but it was a serious bad thing to do. They sent the tainted formula to the migrant facilities where there was children. And so who knows how many of those people died because they were then exposed to this tainted formula because no one wanted to inspect the facilities, and the corporations were required to self-report. So after that happened, I really took an issue with the FDA because I'm like, you guys aren't even doing your job. A lot of the crap that you say is bad if you guys have lobbyists that are pushing the administration in a certain direction to label it bad, but it might actually be beneficial for the American people. Like, we can get into peptides, whatever it might be.
And a lot of the things they articulate are good. We know absolutely
are
not
terrible
good.
for you. Yeah, and I actually had also interviewed the former head of the FDA, and I said, hey, I'm just curious, why are you guys putting Red 40 in food product when you have all these studies that are showing it's causing autism, linked to cancer, ADHD, and it's in our food supply? And by the way, it's banned in Europe, it's banned in parts of Asia, it's banned in Australia, New Zealand. And he goes, well, in small amounts of exposure, it's not bad for you. And I said, well, what happens when it compounds in your system? It becomes toxic. And he didn't have anything to say about that. So the point is
Right,
that...
you ever had a barrel of red vines? Nobody eats those in moderation.
Yeah,
Right?
it's
like I had a friend in high school back in the 90s. He had 3 brothers, and everybody knew. They're like, don't give Brad, red dye 40. Because like if he ate a red vine, he got like crazy. And everybody's like, oh my God, like lock him in his room.
Children, it's impacting their brain chemistry and stuff. So there's a lot of our food supply where you have it cheaper to manufacture. If you put all this crap in it, the food standards are different here in the United States as they are in Europe, or even in parts of South America, even in parts of Asia. And yet they're giving it to us, and we wonder why. Well, why is it that the American people are literally so sick, whether it's obesity, heart disease, all this stuff, cancer rates specifically? And then you look at what's going into our food supply, and then you look, okay, well, let's look how it's impacting like the poorest of the communities that we're then subsidizing through SNAP and EBT. We're saying, okay, yes, here, we want to help you, buy this food, but it's making them sick. And so you have this happening, it's this vicious cycle. And so I tried so hard to go after Red 40 to remove it because, so many people depend on this. And these people are, the whole SNAP EBT, the object is to get off that system. But while they're on it, it's usually, for the most part, kids that are on it, kids eating this stuff. And you want to make sure that we're not incentivizing them to just start them out in life to be sick, and then you absorb those medical costs going back to the health insurance, Medicare, all of that. It's just this toxic cycle. And so I tried hard, and then thank God that Bobby Kennedy got in because he did it within like a couple of days of getting into office. They've reformed so many things, and that I just know because I've seen the institution from within, and it would have never happened if it weren't for that. So like, aside, you might not like Bobby Kennedy, but just understand that what he's doing is actually having massive implications for everyone in the country. And it doesn't just stop there. And so I'm cautiously optimistic. I have always said that I'm not doing this long term, but when I'm here, I'm going to pretend that I'm not going to get elected so I can do the right thing. So it's like, what would you do if you had one last day on Earth? right? And so I'm doing all that things anticipating that maybe I don't get reelected. Of course I'm going to, because I have a really high favorability in my district. But yeah, people love me. But I am doing the right thing, and I think that that needs to be the mindset and perspective. And so I have made friends with people that you would not expect because they have the same perspective on this. And so yes, I'm a Republican, yes, I'm a conservative, but I'm also not controlled by the party. And so that's important to note, because I can do the right thing when it's necessary.
God bless that.
It's a lot, but
No, listen, I track everything you're saying, and it resonates deeply with my lived experience, what I'm watching from afar. Obviously, I'm in Idaho and you're here, but it is one of those things where you're like, okay, you're confirming what I think is happening. And again, I don't know all the details, but it's beautiful to see that it is working.
Well, it's like, by the way, side note, for a lot of Midwestern countries, we can get into Monsanto, and this goes into the rates of Parkinson's disease specifically that they're finding in areas of people that are near golf courses because of the pesticides, but specifically in ag communities, the rates of cancer because of the pesticides that they're using. And so even in places that are considered more rural America, these are our farmers. They're dumping this crap on our food instead of talking about regenerative farming, right? And it's making people sick. To include those people, you're actually seeing, if you were to plot on a map, the highest rates of cancer, et cetera, it's around these areas. And so I just tell people, if you really want to start changing your life, focus by what you're eating. Try to eat as natural and as organic as possible, because it really will make a difference in your health long-term for you and your family.
This is such a tricky conversation. So I've hung out with farmers and ranchers. Essentially, since I moved to Idaho, I started getting connected with people that genuinely are farming. And the narrative around the American agricultural system is one of these rapacious, short-sighted, terrible people. And I'm not saying that those people don't exist in all industries in the United States, but the number of people that engage in high-quality agricultural practices with the best-known practices possible, at least in the state of Idaho, is extremely high. And their care is essentially one of the analogies that I bring. It's like, okay, look, I got a house. I'm gonna pass this house down to my kids. I love this house. This is gonna be my legacy. Well, I'm not going to, blow the windows out and let the roof rot, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of this house so that the house is well, functioning when my kids take it over. And that's a large part of what people view in the soil and the care for the products that they're producing.
The micronutrients, all of it.
Yes. So again, I understand there are some people that most likely larger corporations that are engaging in less positive practices, but I buy my beef from a local beef guy, and they run cattle all over. They have grazing leases, and again, I would encourage people. I think there is a lot of value to paying attention to what you're buying, but also don't take a view of the ag system as this horrible, deleterious, nearsighted people. These are people that are passing their land down to their kids. They're not going to do things that are killing it.
What's a problem too, though, is how I think farmers are treated in Washington.
Yes.
So you have corporations like Monsanto. So Monsanto made their money via Agent Orange. You remember that during Vietnam. And all of a sudden they care about, our food supply, which is kind of a weird angle for a corporation like that. But the way that they are treated, you wonder why there's not more of an incentive for people, or write-off, or investments, or opportunity from the federal government to give these farmers financial means if they are engaged in regenerative farming, because it makes the product better, it makes the soil better. They are able to produce a healthier quality, not just for themselves, but also for the American people. We then in turn consume it. We use it for whatever we might need.
Sure.
And so if it's healthier from the get-go, and it makes us healthier, that lowers the long-term amount of money that we're having to spend on healthcare, all of that. And so I think that I went to the Make America Healthy Action event that they just had in DC last week. And I was talking to a few guys that were into regenerative farming, and they're like, there's no economic incentive or opportunity for people to actually do that, or offer, even have conversations in DC on that. So I'm actually trying to get the Maha Caucus here, which consists of a few members, to try to actually bring in some of these farmers, But again, you have these committees. So how it works with your committee of jurisdiction. So like, for example, I sit on Foreign Affairs and House Oversight, and I love those committees, but they're not considered A-level committees. An A-level or B-level committee is a committee ranked on how much money you can raise by the lobbyists on that committee for your reelection. And so if you are on an ag committee, it's a very high reelection rate, especially if you are in an area that has rural America in it, right? Because that's your committee of jurisdiction. But if you're not listening to the farmers and instead you're listening to Monsanto coming in, how could you ever truly represent? We also had a member that was now running for Senate in Iowa, but she was pushing this massive pro-Chinese pork legislation that was actually crippling the smaller pork farmers, and had all of this crazy stuff that was actually benefiting the communist Chinese from coming in and then being able to sell their pork on the American market, which, in my opinion, if we can incentivize the sales of American meat, why would we not do that? And so that's the type of stuff that I'm talking about. But it is, you know, when you see the level of money coming in, all I can say is that in places like Idaho, I think that you do have a pretty in touch, more independent focused population versus when you're in some of these massive city centers. Because when you're kind of in it and plugged in, you're not in nature, you don't go out into, you know, and you don't have like an environment where you're really having to depend on yourself and your independence in order to survive, which it seems to be a lot of the case in Idaho. You kind of get plugged into the rat race in the system and like the matrix, if you will.
Yeah,
and so,
you have no connection to where, like, you don't know where the food comes from, the shelf at the store.
Yeah, and it's like if the markets were empty, you don't know how to fish, you don't know how to hunt, you might die. Like, and that's the case for some people, right? But when you're in more of these communities that are more independent and I think not as dependent on the government for support, I think that you have these types of conversations that tend to flourish more, and you have a more educated population on these specific topics. But I mean, I'm even seeing it in places that you typically wouldn't. You go to the grocery store now, depending on where you're at, and you see people looking into the ingredients, because I think it has transcended politics and people are more aware of it now. And I will say social media specifically has been a really useful tool and an effort to wake people up on that topic.
Yeah, man, and especially with the coming back to SNAP, the quality of the products that we're offering people. I was having this discussion just the other day with one of the state legislators, who was like, listen, you have this problem with healthcare, you have this problem with young children having horrible diseases, and then you have this problem with SNAP. And of course, there's a large discussion within the state of Idaho about whether to have, like candy bars and sugary drinks on SNAP. And some people are like, it's going to be too hard to categorize them. I'm like, AI, bro. Like, we could figure this out. Like, get an intern and sit them down with 1,000 different products and be like, make a designation. Either this is clearly candy or it's not, or there's an argument, there's a gray area. But at some point, we have to look at, I remember, dude, when I was living in Oakland back in the day, when I was like in my 20s, and I had to go to the grocery store. So I worked evenings, so I had to go to the grocery store like late at night. I remember going to this spot in Oakland, Safeway, and I was just getting like beef and some other things, nothing crazy. And these gals were there, and there was this big fanfare because they were being very loud and kind of bombastic. But they had, they were using, I can't remember what the program was, but it was like government, supported food. And their carts were filled with like just this hypercolor box junk, right? And even I was like, that's what you're buying? Like, that's crazy. Now, again, no shade on them, because obviously that's what the card they had was going to afford them. But it was a real thing. And even me in my 20s was like, that doesn't seem right, man. Like, that's not, and they were very overweight.
It's not nutritional. A lot of the issue, too, is that you have a lot of sugar being added into our food because it gets people addicted.
Yeah.
And people want you to buy the product, so they're gonna add more sugar, because sugar, as you know, lights up the same neural pathways as literal heroin. And so I think that the way to reform SNAP would be, if the companies want to sell their product and qualify for SNAP programs, well, then they should not be allowed to add toxic additives like Red 40, et cetera, and limit the sugar supply. You can eat chocolate, but if you have chocolate that's like 75% sugar, it's of course not going to be healthy for you. Right. And I think that that's probably more or less the argument that we need to be having on it. But again, those reforms, I'm like way more confident that would come out of the administration via an executive order than Congress, just because I see that there is kind of this lethargy on the topic and not really wanting to talk it or reform it. And then you have this aspect of people just kind of want to come up here and they want to go to the parties, and that's it. And then they go home. And then maybe there's a conversation about maybe we should have like an age limit on Congress. So, you have people that aren't 80 seeking re-election that might die and don't care about what happens with the national debt because they're not going to be here in 10 years anyways. And I think that these are good conversations to be having, but that's why you need younger people to get elected. I think that there's a different energy that comes with it.
And to be clear, like, I don't know what to do with SNAP, right? And I look at the concept of providing, oh, my apologies, that's I'm trying to be sensitive to your timing here.
Okay.
I look at the problems we run into with, I didn't grow up with a ton of money, you didn't grow up with a ton of money, and recognizing that those people are like us as young people don't need, like, I remember eating, TV dinners as my primary meals through, high school, because I had paper out, and it's like, that's what I would buy at times. And that's not a good call, right? That, like, Matt, as a young person, I was a D1 athlete in college, and I had enormous problems with being able to even buy food. Like, my freshman year, I didn't have enough money to pay for my dorm and my meal plan, so my meal plan got turned off. And only reason I got to eat, one meal a day is because I made friends with Olivia, who's the lady who let us in at the lunch line. So, like, there are problems with that. I want to make sure we have space for a couple of the other things you want to talk about. Epstein files, which got voted on, and JFK.
Yeah, so we voted to release the Epstein files. This has been something that back in January of this past year, I actually started really pushing the DOJ to release the files because that was something that I think we were all kind of on the campaign trail, like, what's going on here. In February timeframe, I was made aware of a whistleblower that was formerly at the FBI that literally, and I even got Fox to write an article because I was like, this is crazy. Like, how is no one talking about this? Under the former deputy director of the FBI, so prior to the transition taking place after Trump won, that they were destroying evidence pertaining to Jeffrey Epstein. Not just that, but potentially also tampering with evidence. And so why on earth would you ever want to tamper or destroy evidence? Right? Like, does that not send up red flags? Fox News ended up putting out this article about it, and I pretty much didn't hear much from the Democrats on it, really didn't hear much from Republicans on it. And then I kept pushing for the files, and then ultimately, then we started hearing rumors, right, that the Democrats were saying that Trump was involved with the Jeffrey Epstein case. Well, that ended up being a big flop, but you do have the administration that has since provided over 50,000 documents. I think people are like, well, are there going to be arrests, right? Like Jeffrey Epstein, this notorious pedophile. If you don't feel that there are arrests or that people are held accountable, then it really doesn't feel like we have a justice system that's operating and functioning. Well, the victims that we have met with, so Oversight is conducting a full investigation into this. I've met with the victims many times, and those women do deserve justice. They did request files from the former Biden DOJ, and they would not release their files to them. And when I say files, I mean that files of specific, whether it was digital content that had to do with them. So basically the crimes that were committed against them, whether they were minors at the time. They were trying to get that for therapy so that they can kind of put this to rest, and they were denied that. And so we're working to try to get them those files. I've given them my number. I'm like, let me know what I can do for you to actually help facilitate with this.
Kash Patel has come out and said that there are videos, but it's not evidence-based stuff. It's like, oh, it's not stuff that's relevant.
Well, I do
think it
think
sounds like that's not the case.
Well, I think that he's probably going off of whatever they have left. So remember, if you have destruction of evidence, this was not something that I was kind of on my own, I was looking into this because I'm a congressional investigator. So I was looking into this, and I stumbled across this guy. I actually talked to him on the phone a couple times. I was like, can you give me names? I actually passed that to the FBI. Part of the reason why they found the Russiagate burn bags is because of that whistleblower. So they found these burn bags at the FBI of the documents with the Russiagate collusion that the FBI had that they're trying to destroy evidence of. And that was because of our lead. So maybe he's going off of whatever they have left, but sure. Based on the stuff that even James O'Keefe had, based on the stuff that the administration has compiled and released, they had many emails. The emails show that Jeffrey Epstein hated President Trump, shows that Jeffrey Epstein had engaged and was funding many current Democrat members of Congress, and even after his convictions, that they were accepting donation money from him. So it's like, I'm not going to take money from a pedophile. Sorry, not going to happen. Most people shouldn't do that, and they don't want to answer for it. And so what I saw happening was after this narrative started being built that Trump was implicated, I was like, wait, hold on. I've been investigating this. I found zero evidence of that. I've been in the rooms when these victims have literally exonerated the president, said he had nothing to do with it. President Trump has literally had multiple outlets now try to settle lawsuits, billion-dollar lawsuits, because he was like, you guys are putting out fake shit, like was going to sue him. And they've offered to now settle with him, which you don't settle unless you're guilty. So the narrative that's been created that he was somehow involved, I'm all for justice for the victims. I'm all for releasing the files, and that's why I voted to do it. But you can't use that as a means of wrongfully smearing someone that had nothing to do with it. And so that's what I keep telling people is remember that. Now, what's interesting is Jeffrey Epstein specifically, I asked the question in front of all of oversight, so Democrats, Republicans, the Speaker of the House, the victims, and the attorney. I said, do you have evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was a member of intelligence or involved with foreign intelligence operation?
Right.
Because to me, it screams intel op, right? They, at that point, addressed that Jeffrey Epstein, while he was on his day parole, was passing messages through his bodyguard to the former director of the CIA under Bush, and that he was actively in communications or involved with Russia, Israel, and Iran. So to me, that means that he was running an intel op, but I don't think that he was American intelligence.
Oh, God.
So I think that's when you have this issue here of, okay, so where's the purview of authority? Obviously, he was here. He was doing really bad stuff. But explain to me, do you know anyone that would give you a $100 million mansion in New York City just for fun? No.
No.
I don't have friends like that. I don't know many people that are billionaires that have friends like that. So I think that's a question. The victims also had promised us names of their perpetrators, but we have not gotten names yet. And I think that's also because the victims are in the process of suing the Deutsche Bank for not flagging this and engaging in the transactions that contributed to the trafficking. And so when you have an open lawsuit, if the agreement for settling the lawsuit is basically NDAs, and I'm not saying that that's what they're doing, but that I think potentially is the reason why we haven't received the names yet.
And
so there's that
one of the gigantic ironies of all this is like, how do you have victims without perpetrators?
Exactly.
Like they should be able to say like, hey, it was that guy. And again, we make accusations, or not we, but people make accusations in the United States all the time.
And I will say for the victims, I don't blame them for being cautious because they had tried to get justice for so long that of course, you now have this like very political, and it has been politicized. So do they trust us? And that's, I think, the sad part is that you had this smear campaign run against the president without the actual intention of delivering justice for the victims. They get their photos, right, with the victims. They'll go put it and they'll fundraise off of it, but they don't actually care about what happens. And I don't know many members of Congress, aside from myself, Chairman Comer. I will say that there are a few Democrats that have actually been doing a good job for investigating, like trying to get to the bottom of it, but it's maybe less than 5%.
JFK.
Yeah, so all things JFK, you'll find out later on this week. We actually have kind of a bombshell finding with the whistleblower coming forward from the CIA that has seen documentation of a file specifically that pertained to CIA lawyers that admitted that they were trying to stop the inquiries from the, I think it was the Assassination Review Board into Kennedy. So we know for a fact, just via the declassified files, that the CIA lied to Congress, that they stonewalled the investigation, that they engaged in witness intimidation. We know that Congress, the initial Warren Commission, put out a lie with the magic bullet theory, that they also engaged in witness intimidation, that they omitted evidence. And so based on the reports that we've received, and I'll actually come back and do a whole nother episode on JFK with you, because I also ended up, for the first time in U.S. history, receiving the documents that the Russian government had. There were KGB files and wires pertaining to who actually killed Kennedy. They handed those over to us. The National Archives is today in the process of uploading those documents translated for the American people to go through. But it even confirms what we knew, is that there was a political conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy. And I believe, I won't ever have the smoking gun, but based on the evidence and the mosaic that's been formed by this release of documentation, and kudos to Director Radcliffe and Trump on this, it was our own government that killed Kennedy. So there's that.
Yeah. Listen, I really appreciate you. it is very difficult as a private U.S. citizen to hear these things and understand that, again, you just take one industry like medical care. It's like, how do I go up against the medical industry? I have family of 5, like, I'm going to be engaged with the medical institution the rest of my life. And that's a very difficult thing. But understanding all of the enormity of just what you've kind of laid out, it's like 100x. Like, okay, where do we go? Like, how do we go forward? How do we reconcile this as Americans and figure out a way to get our country on track? And the bottom line is, it's like, it takes individual people like you. And I just really appreciate you. I know today's a working day. I want to talk to you for like hours.
We'll
please,
come back.
please, let's do it again.
Yeah.
I'll make plans to come out here. I know you're very busy. Is there anything you'd like to say here at the end?
No, that's it. If you want to follow my official account, go to Rep Luna on X and Instagram.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll do it again.
Cool.